So I'm beginning my page in this journal which I made from a composition book with plain pages. I really like the size of this journal, which is why I come back to it now and again. And although the pages are quite thin, I can prepare them with gesso first, which I have done on this page I'm going to use. Sometimes I stick pages together to make them thicker, but usually just a coat of gesso is fine. So I protect the pages underneath with some baking paper, and I'm going to start by journaling and writing out my thoughts about the passage which I'm looking at. And this verse is Christ's first of the 7 last words. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And I'm going to write my thoughts about the passage, about its context at the time, what Jesus meant when he said this, who he was talking to, and also what it means to me right now. And I'm going to think about the questions that I might want to ask God. So I've written the verse in a red gel pen, which does activate with water a little bit if you get it while it's still slightly wet. But for the main journaling, I'm just using an old biro, just a plain black biro. And really, this is just an outpouring of my brain. It's like a brain dump. So any thoughts that arise, any questions I have, any other verses that come to mind. And I was thinking about the song, How Great the Father's Love for Us, because whenever I hear that song and I think about the words, ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers, it really hits me hard, because I know that used to be me before I encountered God. I was quite dismissive of Christians generally, and I've always had that guilt since. And here I'm reminded of the passage in Matthew, in the Beatitudes, where it says, pray for those who persecute you. And I found it in Matthew 5:43. Now, I don't always do so much written journaling. Quite often I'll go straight in with some paint or some other kind of media. But this one I really wanted to explore it and think about it, and a good way for me to think is to get it all down in words. So here I'm just adding a bit of water on an old brush to that red pen, or that pink, just to get a bit of colour on the page really, and just spreading it around. Now I'm starting with adding some colour, and this is acrylic ink, and it's in Payne's Grey, which is a lovely dark colour. It's not quite black, it's got a bluey tinge to it. This is one of my favourite dark colours. And I'm putting it directly on the page with the dropper, but then I get a brush and just sweep around the edges just to spread that ink out. And rather than having the ink just on one place in the page, I'm spreading that colour around so it's in more than one area. So I'm thinking about balance here and not so much about composition. And I'm enjoying just playing with that ink with a bamboo skewer and just moving it around as I'm meditating on what I've been thinking about, what I've been reading and what I've been journaling. And now I've got some Payne's Grey paint out and I'm going to use that as well. This paint is a slightly bluer version of the ink, and I'm using my fingers just to get really involved with the page here. All the time I'm thinking about what my next move might be. Where do I want to go next with this page? And where is God leading me? And I'm moving this blue around so it's not just in one area of the page, which provides some balance overall. And sometimes I think working in this kind of journal, which is quite a messy journal anyway, just helps me get my hands in and I don't mind making a mess. So here I've got some more ink and this is Flame Red. And I'm moving it with a scraper tool. This is a Catalyst Wedge scraper tool, but you could use an old credit card or anything really that's lime to hand. A piece of cardboard would work. And I'm enjoying this kind of grungy, loose feel to the page. So I'm adding a bit more red ink to another area of the page. And this time I'm using a spray bottle of just water and I'm spreading that ink out. And instead of holding the page up like I normally do so that the drips fall down, I'm making the drips sort of go up the page. And I'm still just working intuitively here and not really knowing exactly where I'm going with it. And there's a bit of excess water there, I'm just dabbing that away with a tissue. Now I want that area at the top left to be drier, so I'm dabbing that. Just getting rid of some excess water, and then I find I like the pattern that it's making, so I'm moving a bit of that ink around. And here I was thinking again about my mocking voice, the way I used to be before I found God. And I just wanted to write that down. And because the red ink wasn't quite dry, I just used the dropper of my white ink just to write out the words. Now I wanted to add some earthy tones. So this is yellow ochre. And I'm just moving that around the page, just working intuitively, using my scraper tool again. And I've got quite a lot of paint on there, so I'm just moving it around. And at the moment I'm not attached to anything that's on the page. And I don't really want those white words particularly. They were just part of the process, so I'm blending that white in now. And there's still quite a lot of wet paint there on the page, so I'm just moving it around a bit with a tissue, getting some paint out to the edges of the page and trying to get rid of some of the wetness that's there. And here I realise that I'm not going to be able to do much else until the page is completely dry, so I give it a quick dry with my heat gun. Now some ideas are starting to form about where I want to go visually with this piece. So I'm adding some white in an area that I think I'll probably want to put some words down. And I'm just applying it with an old credit card there. It's a bit messier than using the Catalyst wedge, and I want that kind of messy effect at the moment. And I also think I want some words down at the bottom right to balance things, so I'm adding some white there as well. So at this point I've decided I want to put an image of a person on the left hand side, so I need to make that area a bit lighter. So I've got some Titan Buff paint and I'm using a palette knife to move that around. I'm using Titan Buff instead of white because it's less stark and it looks more natural. So I found the reference photo I want to use, and that was on Pinterest. It's not a copyright free image, so you do have to be careful about how you use it, but if it's in your own work and you're not selling it, that's okay. Also, I know that my image is not really going to look much like this one. I'm using a Stabilo All pencil for this. This is a black water-soluble pencil. You could use a watercolour pencil or just an HB. And I've got the reference photo there in front of me, and I'm mostly following the dark areas at this point. I would encourage you, even if you're not comfortable with drawing and you don't think you're any good, like a lot of people, to really have a go at this. The watercolour pencils are quite forgiving when you add water to them and activate it. And really, you won't get better unless you practice. And you can see I'm not brilliant, particularly at drawing hands. It is something that I need to practice, but I can get the general shape and idea and convey emotion just with a few lines. Now I have a damp brush and I'm just going to activate those lines because they are made with a water-soluble product. And I'm really concentrating on the dark areas here, still looking at my reference photo. I'm working very loosely and not going in for detail. When you're sketching a face like this, I recommend you look at the shapes in the face and try not to think about what you're actually drawing, rather than thinking I'm drawing the eye or the nose. Look at the shapes, particularly in a photograph like this, which has good contrast, so you can see the white areas quite clearly and see the shapes that they make. You can see the triangle underneath his eye and next to his nose. You can see the shape that his nose makes. And here I've got my plain old black biro out again, and I'm just going to scribble around in his face, concentrating still on the dark areas. And all the time I'm doing this, I'm thinking about his emotion. What's he feeling? Does he need forgiveness? Does he need to forgive somebody? Now, obviously I've used a man as my image, but this still could represent me, because I'm thinking about the emotion rather than this being a man. And also this scribbling can bring in some texture to his hair and to his clothing, and just makes him stand out a bit more. And obviously as I was doing that, I was thinking how hard forgiveness is, so I just felt I had to write forgiveness is hard. And I'm really trying to darken up the dark areas to make the contrast better. And here I've got some Titan Buff again, and I'm going to use that just to pull out the highlights in his face. And again, just looking at my reference photo, seeing where those dramatic points of light were and trying to get those down. This helps just to provide some depth and a three-dimensional quality to the work. And here I'm getting my yellow ochre paint back out. And I'm adding this paint back in around his head, around the image. And this will bring him further forwards onto the page. And I'm moving the yellow ochre around onto the next page as well, so that it blends the two pages together and integrates them better. So now I'm ready to put my first words onto the page. And by this point I was actually reminded of the Lord's Prayer and the part that says, "And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." So on the left hand side I'm really asking God for forgiveness, and I'm using some cling stamps and some black StazOn ink. And here I'm just adding in a bit of white where I'd come off the white area. And this is a Woody 3-in-1 pencil. And it's quite useful just for adding a bit of white on top. It is water soluble, so you could activate it with water, but in this case I'm just using it as it is, and smudging it a bit with my fingers. And I've got my pink gel pen out here, and I'm just going around that heart, which I've decided to leave there and not cover up. And I'm painting inside the heart with some Titan Buff paint. And here I've got some alizarin crimson paint, and I've decided to paint over those words, "Forgiveness is hard." You can still see them at the end. I didn't want to obliterate it completely, but I didn't want it to be prominent in my piece. And because I really like the look of that red with the yellow ochre, I'm adding it in more areas across the pages. And here I'm going back to my Payne's Grey, and I've also got some white on my palette. The Payne's Grey is lovely on its own, but it's also good when it's mixed with white. You get this gorgeous pale blue. And I'm back into meditative mode here, swirling around with the colour and making that heart a bit more defined. And here I've got my flame red ink back out, and I'm applying some to the inside of the heart. Put it on directly with the dropper and then move it around with a damp brush. And I'm using a paper towel here to get some really interesting texture. And I'm going back to using my fingers again to add some more white, just to make that heart stand out a bit more. The white ends up being a bit too thick, so I used my credit card to spread it out. And give it a quick dry with a heat gun. And here I've got some different stamps, and I'm asking now for help with forgiving others, because forgiveness is hard. And I'm just defining the edge of the heart using my Stabilo All black pencil and activating it again with a bit of water. And that's where I decided my page was done. I hope you enjoyed watching how I created the page, and I'm looking forward to seeing where God takes you on this journey. I would love to see any art pages you make around this theme on the Facebook group. And if you have any questions on the process, you can ask me in the comments or ask in the Facebook group. See you soon!